Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller, an African-American licensed psychotherapist, professor, diversity coach, consultant, and author. We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses. Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, we'll have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative?
All right, Tony, thank you so much. I appreciate you collaborating with me to get on here and share some time with me. I know it hasn't been easy, but I'm really happy we made it happen.
No, of course. Thank you so much for having me and for having the grace. Like you said, it has been easy. I hate to blame it on a busy schedule, but I'm so wrapped up in so many things, so it's easy for me to forget, which is probably why I probably need to hire like an assistant, a part-time assistant, something like that. But no, nonetheless, thank you so much for the grace and for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Let's get into it. So I know by now, people want to know, who are the parents of the one and only Ghetto Activist? And what is the major lesson you learned as their child?
That's actually a great question.
Thank you.
I hate to, try and play into any type of stereotypes about our community. But I was kind of raised a single child, a single parent, I guess you can say, by my mother. She's no longer with us. She passed away due to
I'm so
breast
sorry.
cancer. That's all good. I appreciate the apology. But she passed away at the end of 2020. She's 59 years old, but she played a humongous part in my life in shaping who I am as a man, first and foremost, and really also played a big factor into who I am as, I guess you can say, an online educator, especially regarding, kind of like my spiritual beliefs and practices and how that has fundamentally kind of changed throughout my life. But major props to my mom, Felicia Perry, may she rest in peace. I firmly believe that we lived through our ancestors, that our ancestors lived through us. So I know she is, even though she's not here in the physical with me, she's still always going to be with me, through my own genes, but also in the ancestral realm. So I'm glad you asked that question, because I whenever I do these things, that's what people do ask. And I love my mother. She played a humongous role in my life, when it just comes to me being a man and how I treat my own wife, but just a man in general and how I carry myself around people.
So it sounds like she taught you pride, but also how to represent yourself. That's what I'm taking away from that. Oh
yeah. She instilled that very early in terms of how I represent myself, right? But then also taking pride in who I am as a Black man and who we are as Black people, African Americans. In fact, some of my best memories I have with my mom is when she would take me to the voting booth. I remember going to the voting booth back when she voted for Bill Clinton, and all the way up until when I wasn't old enough to vote until 2008, Obama's first stint. But every single election, not only those elections, but also local elections, and back when we were staying in East St. Louis for a limited, but then in Belleville, Illinois, she would take me even to those local elections when it came to the school boards and things like that. So she instilled so much in me in terms of taking pride in our own community, but then also taking pride in our responsibility that we have to our community.
I love that, because people often overlook the local elections. They don't realize how important they are. So I love that you put that in there.
I mean, when it comes to your kids' education and just public funds in general, I know it's tough to really get a handle on, who has that type of say-so, but, at the very least, and this is what she would always tell me, at the very least, show up. There's some information that's on ballots, you know what I mean, to kind of help you out. But I mean, even if, and I hate to say this, but even if you're voting on party lines, you can use your own eyes and your own experience to know this party's been in power for so long and then nothing's changed. So maybe I need to switch it up and figure something out. But nonetheless, get in there and participate, because something that she would often tell me is that, that we had people that died for this right to vote. So we have that responsibility to ourselves and our own community, specifically the Black community in whatever cities we're in, to show up. it's the very least that we could do.
I love everything you're saying. And we are deeply challenged right now by the voting system because we see who's running everything and getting away with everything that they do. But I really appreciate you bringing that to the table. Now, I want to ask you, not just I'm clear on what led to you becoming the Ghetto Activist, but I also want to know why the Ghetto Activist? Like, what did you put into it? One day you were just like, yeah, that's it. Clear on it.
It's so funny how it kind of came to be a thing. I've been a writer. I've always kind of prided myself on being a writer first. So the blog came before the Instagram account and the TikTok account and all that stuff. But even before the blog, I remember I had just transferred to Harris-Stowe State University. For my first, I went to Greenville College. When I graduated high school 2010, and then I spent 2 years at Greenville with a double major history education before I dropped out because it was one of those PWIs that like it really was working against me. I didn't see myself, really excelling there. And then I transferred to Harris-Stowe State University 2012. And I was writing back then, and I would always have the alias, the Ghetto Activist. And like I've even got papers that are saved on flash drives with that tagline. But the reason why the Ghetto Activist is because I'm from, like I said, I spent most of my early years all the way up until about maybe the fourth grade actually, living in East St. Louis, Illinois. And for those who don't know the area, it's a rough town. You know what I mean? It's a rough city. You could use Google and look it up. St. Louis is always, I hate to say it because there's nothing to brag about, but it's just a reality. But St. Louis itself is always top 3 murder cap per capita in the United States. And we all know how dangerous the United States is. So we could essentially say one of the most dangerous places in the world. And a lot of my friends, early childhood friends, weren't as lucky as me, right? Didn't have a mom like mine. So not only did they not escape the luck, but they also didn't have a strong foundation, and have been in and out of jail. Definitely haven't, I think in terms of my core group friends, when I was a young kid, I might be the only one with a college degree. So I really claim to the title, the Ghetto Activist, to most importantly, remind myself, where I came from. And to stay true to, who I am as in those early years as me growing up, to stay true to myself, because, like I said, I never try and play into a lot of the harmful stereotypes that our community faces, but I feel like I have an obligation to show the world that, there are flowers that grow in the hood. You know what I mean? Like, there are people like myself who, you can say I have the white man's paperwork, like I'm highly educated, if you will, but I'm not that far removed. You know what I mean? I'm still from around the way. So it's more so a reminder for myself, but also just to let people know that, there are flowers, there are roses that grow in the hood. So,
but here's the thing. First of all, I love that you reclaim ghetto. And I love that. I love that. And also, poverty is the problem, not race.
Exactly.
And I get tired of the misalignment of that. And so if every community had access, there would be little to no poverty. Probably more white collar crime would get highlighted.
Oh yeah.
So, it's easy to blame it regionally. It's easy to blame it on skin color. It takes a lot more of critical thinking to just see where crime lives, and it lives in the most impoverished communities across the country, in the world.
And it's not by accident that those impoverished areas have a lot of African Americans. I mean, we all know the history of covenant laws that then gave way to redlining, right? And how one of my favorite Jay-Z bars is when he says, why they call a project, because it's a project. You know what I mean? Like it's by design. That you see a lot of us in these impoverished areas. So I appreciate you for bringing that up, though, because I don't want people to get misconstrued into thinking that, race is the main factor into it. No, it's all about economics and how we, and of course, race plays a factor into who gets access to certain economics and whether it be subsidies or grants, things of that nature that help boost communities out of poverty. But let's not get confused, right?
The other day I posted something probably, I don't know, like 3 weeks ago, and I had a small following, so I focused mostly on the podcast, but, Jane Fonda speaking truth into how, racism is at the core of everything, everything. Man, you want some white people get upset. Oof. They were firing on that one.
Man, what am I, and I shouldn't say it's me or my thought, but, if you read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, he talks about the eradication of white people, which he's really talking about the eradication of race-based thinking. But as long as we live in a racialistic society, you can't escape race. Race is, I mean, come on now, the so-called the founding fathers of this country, signed off on a document that said all men are created equal while you're also enslaving people. So like you can't have that. You can't have that history and not think that race doesn't play into anything involving this society, because it's at the very core.
You want to talk cognitive dissonance?
I mean, and that's a big thing when it comes to whiteness.
Yes,
it's a big thing when it comes to whiteness.
Okay, so what is Black amnesia?
I never had that question asked to me before, and because it's never been asked to me, I've never had a thought. If I were to define it, I honestly don't know. Other than like, I'll put it. Maybe I can explain it in a historical sense of how I see it happening throughout our, time here in this country, right? One, I think it's a sense of we're always trying to counter the narrative to where we forget how far we've came, right? In a sense that, so I deal heavily in Afrocentric history and Afrocentric telling of history, right? And if we look at how our community has handled that, we can see it in different waves, right? We can look at the Garveyites, right? Marcus Garvey was a huge Pan-Africanist. In fact, he's known as the father of Pan-Africanism. And he really talked about the history of Black people worldwide, right? And connecting it with his time that he got to visit the King Tut exhibit that happened in New York during his time period. And then there was this huge wave of Garveyites, right? And then something happened to where it fell off, right? And then we have Malcolm X picking it kind of back up. And his, passion towards Islam really led him into the Afrocentric telling of history, like J.A. Rogers and John Henry Clark was one of his teachers, or two of his teachers, in fact, right? So you have that explosion, and then you have that fall off again. And then you have the rise of the Joseph Ben-Yakinans, the Anthony Browders, which is kind of, we're talking, late 90s. And then that fell off to where we are kind of like now, right? So there's that one example of it. But then there's also what I would believe to be not so much self-inflicted, but through the Ma'afa, or the Great Disaster, or the Transatlantic Slave Period, we had the literal stripping of our history, our culture, our richness, and all of that, to where a lot of us think slavery is our beginning, right? So in a sense, it's amnesia to the fact that we don't remember how great we once were 2,000, 4,000 years ago, right?
Right.
So I would kind of see it as that in one of those two categories, but I'm very interested to know, like, because I've never heard this term before. So I'm very interested to know, what led you to ask me that question.
Well, I think about the fact that we are forced to be in denial to survive, and really the empowerment comes from remembering to help us thrive, right? Because I think of survival as just hanging on by the limb. And just hanging on, really.
Yeah.
But I see it's thriving, which is what we do as a community. One foot in front of the other, we find a way. And that's because of our ancestors. And so if we have Black amnesia, we don't remember how we got here. And that that's a problem for our future.
Now see that I agree wholeheartedly, which is why I've embraced the St. Cova symbol, primarily as my logo, I guess you can say. But for those who don't know what St. Cova is, it comes from the Dinka tribe. It comes from the Dinka script, which is actually, I ran across some information by Anthony Browder that he was excavating one of the 25th dynasty temples from ancient Kemet, which the 25th dynasty was set up by the Kushites when they came to retake control of ancient Kemet because it was actually their ancestral land. And in the temple of one of these high priests from the 25th dynasty, there was a St. Cova, the heart symbol, which is the most oldest version of the St. Cova symbol in the temple. But anyway, we essentially subscribe the St. Cova symbol, which is the bird with its head backwards with the egg in its mouth, which basically represents the meaning to look back on one's past and pass that information into the future generations, right? But that's why I embrace St. Cova, because we are a great people. We have a great history, and a lot of it because of what's been done to us through the Ma'afa. What's also been stolen by other nations. A lot of people have claimed a lot of Black history as their own, so we really don't know how great we once were. But once we actually, dust the books off and take a look for ourselves and see the evidence for ourselves, it reestablishes a sense of self-esteem and as Robin Walker would call it, group esteem, to where not only do we have high esteem in ourselves, but we also have high esteem of our people and our community.
Yeah. Yes. All right. I'm deciding whether or not to get into this or not, because I know you're going to go all the way there. So I'm going to do it. All right. Let's take this up a notch and talk about the myth, the Bible is Black history, and why you took this on.
Oh, sorry. I did not think we was going to go here today, but I'm glad you did. First, this is a lot. It's going to be, hopefully I can cram this all in to where it's at least high level enough for people to understand.
Yeah, go up to the highest level. If they want to research it, they can research more.
Because
I just want to get them thinking.
I don't want to offend anybody. I want to start by saying, you asked me earlier about my mother, and I credited a lot of my spiritual growth to my mother because I grew up in the church. I remember going to church. I was baptized. I grew up Southern Baptist. I was baptized when I was 7. I got the pictures of it still. The first college I went to was Greenville College, right, which is a Christian university now. It was a Christian college then, but it's a Christian university now. So I'm talking about, I grew up in the church. I've been to the university level where I had to take, biblical classes where I studied the Bible. I went on mission. I didn't go on a missions trip, but I went on a trip to where, I was introduced to a lot of denominations within the Christian faith that people are not really hip to. So like, the Mennonites, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But the question and the reason why we need to understand that the Bible is not Black history, the first thing I want to let people know is that so let's say on this hand, we have the historical record, right? History facts that can be backed by archaeological proof and findings, things of that nature. And then you have biblical literature, right? And that means, that's not to say that everything that's in the Bible is literature. It's not, it's not real. It can't be backed up. But it is to say that we need to understand that there are these two platforms, right? So did Adam and Eve actually happen? Was there a great flood that, surrounded the world with 30 cubics of water? You can't even cover Mount Everest with that. You know what I mean? Like, we have to be logical when it comes to some of these things that are in the Bible. But there's also mentions of, King Taharka and his battle to help, Israel reclaim his land. That actually happened. We can find that in archaeological proof, right? So we need to understand that first and foremost. We need to understand reality. We need to understand mythology, right? And so understanding that Black history predates any holy scripture that is included in, let's just say, the King James version of the Bible. So that includes, the first Old Testament, the first 5 books, And then that also includes the New Testament, right? Our history is much older than any of that. Any of that mythology can even be thought of. And if you really look at the history of mythology, you can start to see some of those similarities in much older mythology that was pulled into the Hebrew script as well as what we would call the Christian script. So you have a great flood story. There's a great flood story in ancient Kemet when Ra was upset about how people were viewing him, and he transformed himself into Hit-Haru and then flooded the earth. And then he made a covenant with a few other people, and they survived, right? There's a story of Shishak and Ramses II, or Ramesu, where Ramesu prays to Ra, essentially, and asks for guidance. And Ra sends Shishak, what we would call an angel or a goddess, to grant him knowledge through the fruit of knowledge, right? But then we also have the story of Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge, or the tree of good and evil, right? So you can see some of these similarities in much older mythology, but again, we need to understand that it's mythology, right? And that mythology and actual history have two different playing fields, right? That's the ground thing that we need to understand.
Well, no, I think that's like just enough.
Right.
That's just enough. That's good. Thank you so much.
Because I got some reading materials too that really gets into, if people want to look into the actual, who were if there were people called the Israelites, who they actually were. There's a lot of great literature that talks about the Hyksos and the Hyksos time within Kemet, right? How they came to power and how they were driven out. If people that want to check that out, check out the Victory Steely.
Don't give it all away. Don't give it all away.
Yeah,
don't give it all away.
You're right.
They gotta follow you for more.
Yeah, you're right. I got a series called Ghetto Sunday School where I really jump into a lot of this stuff.
That's what I'm saying. Don't give it all away. Don't give it all away.
You can check out them sources, but you're right.
This is why they need to follow you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I've had a lot of education following you. I think I know a lot, and then I find somebody like you, and I learn a whole lot more. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
Make them come to you.
I appreciate that.
All right. So, what does the quote on your website mean to you?
Which
if you're
quote?
Black. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
This one. If you're Black, you should be thinking Black. If you're Black and you're not thinking Black, if you're Black and you're not thinking Black at this late date, well, I'm sorry for you.
First off, I need to, do you know, did I attribute who said that quote?
Malcolm X.
That's right. Okay. So, I need to say this because normally people ask me who was like some of my biggest influences, and out the gate, it's Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, formerly known as Malcolm X. But that quote specifically is what, and we need to do this as a community because it's getting out of hand. But that quote itself is what I would use if somebody were to ask me to define wokeness. That's wokeness to me, right? Because I think wokeness only pertains to the Black consciousness. It had no business getting outside our community and being hijacked, but just like Bye Felicia and all these other phrases that were in our community got hijacked and have been misappropriated and misused now. And now people are really starting to forget what being woke meant, right? And what being woke means for the Black psyche. But what that quote means to me is that you have now gained the awareness to see, Garvey put it as race first, right? I want to kind of get away. I hate using race-based terms, because, ultimately, if we're going to eradicate white supremacy, we need to understand that whiteness itself, race itself, is the strength that gives the ideology of race. The pseudoscience of race is what gives white supremacy its strength. But I got to meet people where they are, right? So to think Black means that you understand this racialistic society, right? And you understand it well enough to not only thrive yourself, but to help others in the community wake up to the racialistic society that we live in and pull themselves and therefore pulling the community out of where we've been placed in this racialistic society, right?
Perfect.
And there's so much information out here now to where if somebody's tried to do that and you haven't taken that initiative upon yourself to better yourself and better your community, then it's too late for you.
Okay, that sums it up. I'm quiet. I don't think nothing needs to be said about that. All right, I got another one for you. Our dear Malcolm. We sold ourselves into enslavement. You can't hate the roots of the tree without ending up hating the tree. You can't hate your origin without ending up hating yourself. You can't hate the land, your motherland, the place that you came from. And we can't hate Africa without ending up hating ourselves.
That's probably one of my favorite quotes.
I love Malcolm.
I love Malcolm. I still listen to Malcolm's speeches. In fact, today, I dropped a piece. I dropped a series called Timeless Teachings, where I bring up a lot of these old poems and quotes from some of my most influential teachers. And I featured Malcolm today with some of his quotes that he gave during the Oxford Union. But that quote specifically is one of my favorites for right now, because what I'm starting to see, it circles around me. I want to say in my circle, because I think I really put sources and valid information first and foremost. But there are people who don't have that type of integrity online, and you start seeing, people talking about how, the Americas is the original motherland, and that we all don't come from Africa. First, that's nonsense in the sense of, we all know that the Homo sapien in the entire human family, so Homo erectus and all those other ones, originated in Africa. You don't find any of the remains older than the ones that you find in Africa. So there's that one common fact, of course. But then there is also, sources that tell us that Africans migrated to Americas before Europeans even, had the nerve to think about crossing the Atlantic, or even had the nerve to think that the world was round, right? And because so much has been done to erase that history and hide that history and suppress that history, a lot of us run into a little bit of those sources and completely use that to eradicate our connection to the motherland. Which, like Malcolm said, you can't love yourself and hate your roots. It's impossible. Even if you don't think those are your roots, you need to do more research, because it's there in your face.
I love it. I have a couple more questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
I want you to talk about your mini-series, Dismantling Internalized Racism.
That's something I need to actually I need to do some more pieces on, because I don't think I ever wrapped it up on the blog, and if I want to do it on Instagram, it'll probably be like 8 parts, because it's so much.
Let me just throw this at you, because I see it one version for white bodies and another version for brown and black bodies, because just in my mindset and all the education I've done for myself, internalized racism belongs in the white body, and internalized oppression is ours to battle. The fact that we uphold white supremacy with our self-hatred that's been taught to us through white supremacy, because we don't own racism. So how can we internalize it? I see it much more as, it's yours. I don't want to make it seem like we can share anything related to that. I got my own stuff to work out. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I wouldn't necessarily oppose it. But on a grander scale, I think, and this is what I believe, right? I think that what has happened, and just studying history, what's happened is the ideology of race, right? The pseudoscience of race, which has created white supremacy, has oppressed all of us. And I'm not trying to say we're all, have the same experience underneath whiteness, right? Of course, because that's ridiculous, right? There's a hierarchy when it comes to race, right? That's why you have white supremacy, because whiteness reigns supreme of the hierarchy, right? And this is what I try and do in general, right? The series Internalized White Supremacy, internalized racism is really focused on us, right? And how we've internalized these messages of oppression, to put it in your phrase.
Yeah. Okay.
But to step back and really look at it in totality, whiteness in the ideology of race, right? So the pseudoscience of race has robbed European Americans of their heritage, has robbed them of their cultural DNA, their cultural identity, right? And it's also implemented what, there's been a group of, back in the 80s and the early 90s, there were a group of black psychiatrists that tried to get racism identified as a mental illness, because I don't agree with that, necessarily, but I do believe that whiteness itself and the ideology of race has created this mental state that is not reality, right? It has caused people to believe things and truly believe things that just are not the truth. And it has, because of that strong belief, it has affected motor skills. It affected the human bond, the human connection that we should all have, right? So in that sense, I believe, we're all oppressed by the pseudoscience and the ideology of race. But I will share the sentiment that it is a difference, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it is a naming convention that needs to change on my part to where it better connects with our community, right?
Yeah.
Because that is the truth.
Well, and the reason why I say that is because, white bodies are always trying to give away racism. And I was upset with Ibram in his last books for making it sound like we internalize racism. I'm like, come on, man, that's all we need to do is seem like we share that. We don't.
No, and I do really I try and make the distinction when I say things like all white people are racist, right? And that black people can't be racist, you know what I mean, by definition, because we don't hold, racism is more than just color prejudice, right?
Right.
Racism is color prejudice plus social power plus legal authority, right? You have to have all three, right?
Yeah.
It's just one thing for me to be like, I hate white people, but it's another thing for me to say, I hate white people. Therefore, I'm also going to create legislation that handicaps white people.
Right.
And not only that, I'm also going to have the social power and social authority to get other people to buy into that legislation and support that legislation. That is racism.
Right.
In its totality. It's not just color prejudice. Like me saying I don't like white people, that don't mean, I don't know if I could cuss, but that don't mean nothing. Okay, that don't mean shit. You know what I mean? And that's just the reality of it. So like, when I say black people can't be racist, that's what I'm talking about. And that all white people are racist. I mean, if you live in a racialistic society and you benefit from said society, you are racist. And that's not, and a lot of people see racism through that good, bad binary. And I think that needs to change, because when European American so-called white people see racism through that good, bad binary, it helps excuse them from actually doing the hard work, right? Because they'll just say, oh, I'm not, inherently bad to black people. I have black friends. I have black people in my family. Like I contribute to black educators. You know what I mean? That's beyond, that's not even really the point here. When it comes to racism, racism really deals with the society and how society not only sees us, but also enacts laws, legislation, social power to keep the hierarchy intact, right?
Mm-hmm. That is why everything you said is why I don't like racism near the global majority, because the minute people hear that, they believe somehow it's a shared experience, and it's not. It has hurt us all. I agree with you completely.
Mm-hmm.
And white body, the structure of whiteness owns racism. There we go.
Facts. And I will say, just to end it off, when I say black people can't be racist, the only caveat that I'll add in there is that we can be racist to one another, right? So we can use the tools and the systems in place to oppress ourselves and oppress people within our community, right? So I will say that part, that white people own it, even though, let's put it like this. Let's say, I hate to say a gun, but let's say the gun is racism. The gun is owned by the white community. It's been, it has the white community's name on it, us black folks can take that and then shoot ourselves with it and shoot people in our community with it.
I am not disagreeing with you. I would just like us to not call it racism.
And I feel you on that, though. And like I said, it's probably a naming convention on my end that needs to change.
I'm going to leave that to you to come up with another name because I get nervous every time we something towards each other and it has race in it.
You're right, though.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's all stems from upholding white supremacy. Can we uphold white supremacy in brown and black bodies? Absolutely. Absolutely. I still don't own racism.
But let's change the naming convention because I don't want the message to get lost because I didn't name this something else. You know what I mean? So you're right on that. I need to do a better job I appreciate that too, though.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up here, but I want to know, let me just say, if you don't know it already, I'm a fan. I really respect and appreciate you. I'm an elder in the community. And, I hang on to you younger people who are doing what I'm running out of, which is the steam to push the lessons, and you got the media and you have the education. So many of us self-educated, but it really relies on all of you. So I just want to make it clear that I appreciate you. I respect you. I honor you. And thank you so much for what you do. It means so much to me and so many people. We're tired.
I appreciate that. I truly appreciate that. Because I, just like you lean on us, I lean on the elders for guidance. I mean it, and really for guidance because we are ancestors. Our elders need to be respected. That's something that I wish I wish our community picks back up because it is an African tradition to respect elders, to turn to elders for wisdom and knowledge. I hope that we do, at some point in time, do that. Yeah, but thank you so much. So that means a lot to hear, honestly.
Excellent. So where do you go from here?
Good question.
You're blowing up, man.
I mean, I've had other people in my community that's taken theirs to much higher heights than me, simply just because social media has changed so much. In ways that I'm just not willing to conform myself to, right? So like on Instagram, it might be like, it's not my biggest platform, but TikTok's my biggest platform. And, that's all video creation. I like to get my face out the scene, right? It's not that, I think I'm ugly or nothing like that, but I think a lot of people in my community that I'm in community with, who, have a lot of success, whether it's on Instagram through their reels or through TikTok. A lot of people follow them because, I hate to put it plain, but a lot of people like to see good looking people. And then it's a bonus, that they're actually learning from them. You know what I mean? Whereas for me, I like to keep the information first and foremost. So I'm blowing up, but I know I could blow up a lot more if I did certain things that I'm just not willing to do because it's all about the information for me.
I hear you, and I see that in your posts. And the more people realize, the depth of the information you provide, it's going to steamroll, So it's happening. And in that vein, let's wrap up by giving all of your social media handles so people know where to find you to learn more.
Yeah. So on TikTok and Instagram, you can find me at the Ghetto Activist. On Twitter, where I do an occasional Twitter rant, where you can catch some nice threads with some information. I am at Ghetto Activist. Somebody took the Ghetto Activist, but I'm at Ghetto Activist on Twitter. And then of course the blog. I haven't updated it in some time, but there's still some very valuable information there. One of my favorite pieces of the blog, which is just theghettoactivist.com, is the ghetto community, where I have a lot of guest writers come in and share their thoughts. One thing that I've learned very early is that me as a cisgender heterosexual Black man, I can't define the Black experience by myself. It's impossible. So a lot of people that you find in the ghetto community are people that identify extremely different than myself, but still have value to add to the conversation when it comes to the Black community and where we go as a community. So theghettoactivist.com, Instagram and TikTok, The Ghetto Activist, and then on Twitter, you can just find me at Ghetto Activist.
And then Do you do any, what do you call it? LinkedIn, anything like that? Anything else?
I'm not on LinkedIn. I have a professional, because I guess I should say this. I also have a 9 to 5. That is what people would call a big boy 9 to 5, right? So I work for Nestle Purina as a digital marketing compliance manager. So I have an actual very demanding 9 to 5, which is why I need to hire like an assistant because I do 40 hours a week for Nestle Purina, and then I come home and do 30 hours for the Ghetto Activist. Like it's kind of crazy, right? Because I also, in addition to making the post, I read myself. Essentially, I'm really just sharing my learning and unlearning journey, at a much higher level when it comes to the public. But for myself, that also incorporates time that I'm spending reading books, expanding my own knowledge. So, long story short, I don't have a LinkedIn for the Ghetto Activist, but I should make one because I've also dealt with the DEI space, if you will. And I've done seminars there to where, I can upload some information and help people in the corporate world, embrace a more diverse, work environment, for their people. So I'm glad you asked that because I'm going to be making one. So let's just say not now, but in the future I will have one.
All right, right on. I just want to get all that out though, so everybody knows where to find you, find your words, find your wisdom, and become educated. Again, thank you so much for sharing the space with me, brother. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm glad that we were able to make it happen. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Shout out to you. Shout out to all the work you've been doing. Shout out to the team that you got behind you. I know it's a lot to do all of this, which is why I never even thought of doing a podcast because it takes a lot. So shout out to you. Shout out to your team. And I appreciate you. The community appreciates you. And I'm glad that I was able to share space with you guys.
Right on. I'll reach out to you when it's time to drop.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Take care, brother.
Peace and love.
Same.